Slow down, slow down, because I think early on in any winemaker's career, they are so excited about creating something, and they are so excited to get to the end of that first process that they go through. That oftentimes it takes so long to learn your craft because you're not paying attention to the things that you need to, and that's because you're moving at a million miles a minute because you don't have the experience. I would go back and say it's okay to make some of these mistakes that you were so scared to make, because honestly, that's what I've learned the most from, is when you make a mistake and you go, huh, how do I not do that again? But it's the process of learning how to get yourself out of it. So the number one advice I could give to my younger winemaking self is slow down and enjoy those first couple of vintages.
Welcome, everybody, to the Barrels and Roots podcast. I am here today with you. My name is Sean, and I am your host, and I have a really awesome guest with me. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name's Kyle Altomare. I'm a winemaker at Gloria Ferrer, and I'm responsible for everything from grape to bottle. We look at everything here in our estate, and we have 330 acres here, all organically certified. We specialize in making sparkling wine and a few other varietals as well.
That's awesome. Now, talk to me, because there's so many amazing things to unpack there. I grew up in the Napa Sonoma region, and one of the things that people don't realize is that one of the things that people forget is that consumers will see a bottle of wine, but forget that this was grown. Comes from a plant. There's this whole process.
Yep.
When I was just back in the Napa Valley last week with my wife, and we were driving down the valley, and Sonoma's the same, and you smell it. The whole valley smells right now as the crush is beginning. But it's this whole thing. How did you go down this journey into winemaking? What first drew you to the craft?
It's really fun because I kind of back-ended my way into it. This is a second career for me. My
Awesome.
original plan was to be a teacher, and I went through, got my teaching credential, went through and did everything, started teaching, and quickly realized that a lot of what I was doing was not actually teaching and educating, which was my passion. That was what I loved to do. So when I decided to make a move out of teaching, I was looking around, and I was thinking about, what did I want my career to look like? What did I want my path to look like? And, wine had always been around for me. My parents, their favorite thing to do on the weekends when we were kids was come up here, and it was back when you could go to Visa Tui and still get shiners for like $6 a bottle. Been back when the Wild West, before the TTP got involved, right? And, it was always around, and I always remember wanting to smell it. I never really wanted to taste it, but I always wanted to smell it. And I was talking to other people, and I'd heard a lot of people, lawyers, doctors, other things, but I never heard anybody say, I used to be a winemaker, right? You heard a lot of lawyers that were like, I used to be in law, and now I'm a winemaker. I used to be in tech, and now I make wine. I used to be a doctor, and now I own a vineyard, right? And I was like, well, why don't I skip that whole in between and just go to where everybody's going? And I think it's all kind of hindsight's 2020, right? My dad really prepped me for this. My dad was a chef, and he quickly realized that lifestyle wasn't conducive to having a family. So he got out of out of cooking and into real estate. But his passion was still food, and his passion was still flavor. So, being in the stock market and being in real estate, my dad was done at like 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And he'd just go out, go to the farmer's market. He'd purchase something that we were going to make that day. So our childhood was spent, after sports and after other things, after school, cooking. So, I didn't really realize that, a normal dinner on a Tuesday night wasn't a New York strip with like creamed spinach and Brussels sprouts and baked potatoes, right? Until I went to I never realized why anybody wanted to come to our house. And then I went to our friend's house, and, they're serving mac and cheese out of a box. And I was like, pasta's not supposed to be orange, right? It's not supposed to be that color. What is it? You're kind of poking it with your fork, and you're like, huh. But it was my dad's way of really, trying to make me dissect flavor on a very granular level. So we play this game when I was growing up, and, we'd be talking, I'd be playing sports and we'd get home from sports, and he'd cook a meal, and we'd be sitting down. And that was the rule. We always sat down for dinner. There was never, and my dad was a big Italian family, right? We never It was never on the go. It was never this. The meal was always the kind of central point of the day, and that included Sundays. Right, Italian dinner on Sundays started at 2 o'clock. You started gravy in the morning. Right, it was cooking all day. But he would about halfway through the meal, he would ask me, what did I leave out? And it was his way of teaching me not only the recipe, but a way to dissect flavor on a very, very granular level. So I had to know the
Oh,
recipe, right, of
man.
what we were eating. And sometimes he wouldn't leave anything out. It would just be, he just wanted me to kind of go through the process of looking at things. And it really taught me to look at flavor in a different way. And it was actually really funny because I just had one of our next door neighbors when I was growing up. She came up here to Gloria Ferrer, and we were sitting down on the terrace, and she said, every time I traveled and I stayed at your house, I don't think your dad ever cooked me the same meal twice. And it kind of hit me. I was like, wait, I never really had the same meal twice. So, and it's something we've carried through
Wow.
to our kids and to what we do with our family. And I take that approach to winemaking as well. I don't want to ever bring the same exact thing twice. I want you to
Wow.
continuously feel like you're drinking high quality wine, and you're drinking wine that is conducive to our portfolio or anything that we make. But I want you to always be looking at it in a different way. I want you to always be finding something new, finding something exciting, and that can be done through a number of different facets. But yeah, I'm just obsessed with flavor, and any way we can get more flavor into wine, I think is better, right? And it's different. Wine is really fun because it's such a different beverage than any other fermented beverage. There's a sense of community around it, and it brings people together, which is what I love. So that's kind of how I back ended my way into the industry, where I was just looking at things that I wanted to do, and it really spoke to me just kind of on a primal level. Because at the end of the day, we sit down and it's kind of like, what more do you want? You have a roof over your head, you have good food on the table, you have good wine, and you have people that you want to be around. That's kind of the biggest blessing that you can get in life. And to be able to do that every day is just such a gift. It's really awesome.
There's so much to unpack there and so many awesome levels. I grew up in one of those mac and cheese houses where we were
Yeah.
cooking things, and I love my mom, but a cook she was, a chef she was not. But it was interesting because my wife's family is Vietnamese, and my mother-in-law is a chef and a half. And you want to talk about, like, my daughter, um, she just has grown up a little foodie. And one of the things that it's interesting is because when we will go and travel places, we'll go to a very nice restaurant and we'll go and sit down. And my daughter's like, it's okay. And we're like, this is great, But grandma has the way of packing so many flavors into everything. And it's just a feast of the senses. From the moment you walk into the kitchen, there is this, the aroma, the steam coming off of this is one of the things that people don't realize is that everyone in the West knows pho, but there's a whole other world of soups and noodles and stuff. And my mother-in-law will make, bún bò Huế and then bún riêu, which are these other amazingly savory noodle dishes. And when you walk in and just the steam hits you coming off, and you just go in and there's these aromas, and it's like you don't realize how many ways it's like this stimulation is coming at you. And some of the things that's interesting is, like, when you said that your dad would leave something out. My wife, I am living in Southeast Asia, but growing up in California, I love Mexican food.
Oh yeah.
And, like, we have great Vietnamese food here in Vietnam. Like where I'm at right now, I split my time between California and the U.S. And Vietnam. And then when I'm here, though, I just can't get Mexican food. There's a couple places, but it's nowhere the same. But what's interesting is one day my wife was like, I feel for you. When we're in the U.S., I grabbed an amazing burrito. And then I came back and now she's like, I'm not going to have that for a while. My wife's like, well, I know where we can get tortillas and we have beans and rice. And I was like, but you know what? It's the salsa that makes the burrito, that's the thing. And she's like, I can do that for you. And I was like, but can you? And she's like, I'm gonna make you a pico de gallo salsa. And I was like, all right, well, let's see what you come up with. But here's the thing. some of the ingredients she couldn't get, but then she was able to substitute like some of these super fresh fruits. So it was like a mango salsa because we have these tropical mangoes that are even more succulent and sweet than anything that you get in California. And she just threw it into the salsa, and I just was like, I ate it, and I was just like, "How is it?" And I just was like, bam! And, like, it was just this dance of flavors in my mouth, and I just was like, I wanted to cry for a second. Like, I was just sitting there, and she's like, "Is it bad?" I was like, "No, no, 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 just hold on for a second. You don't know what I'm experiencing right now." And she tried it, and she looked at me, she's like, "That's damn good." And I said, "Yes, it is. Yes, it is." But it was just this, what was interesting was, like, it didn't taste right, but it didn't taste wrong. It was just different, and it was new, and it was this expansion of flavors that I couldn't even comprehend until someone else was like, "Hey, check this out."
It's so fun, and that's what I love. It's like, and you had said, your daughter goes out to these restaurants, and it's like, it's okay. And we have the same thing with our kids too, where it's like we go out and they're like, and you feel bad, right? Because people are putting their heart and their soul into this, but I think it's just such a different feel, right? And especially like we're big on growing our own vegetables and produce in the backyard as well.
I
And we
love
don't
that.
have a large garden, but we have enough that the kids can go out after school and just pick things, right? And it's like then they go to the store and they get the stuff that's off the shelf, and it just doesn't resonate as much with them. And I think that's what we really are striving to get back towards. Is this communion with nature. You have to be in harmony, right?
I love that.
And it's seasonal, right? Like you're talking about, the fruits that you can get in Vietnam versus here, and it's like, yeah, it is regional and it's seasonal, and we're so used to this convenience factor of, well, I get tomatoes all year round, and it's like, but you shouldn't be able to get tomatoes all year round.
Right?
You shouldn't be able to get peaches in the winter, and it's just, it's very different because our kids never really liked peaches, and then we have a peach tree in the backyard, and they're like, oh, when it's fresh and it's grown and it's organic and it's no pesticides, no synthetic inputs, you're like, that's how it's supposed to taste. And I think that's just
Yeah.
such a cool thing, and that's what I love about food and wine in general is you can communicate. You don't have to speak the same language, but food is universal. You can speak to
Yes.
people through food, and you guys don't have to say a word. But you can tell the passion, the love, the care. And it's also about service, right? It's about, your
Yeah.
wife saw that you wanted something that you were craving from back home, and it may not have been exactly like you got back at home, but it's that act of service, that love, that care that goes into making something that's what I really love about food and wine is it brings people together, and it makes people happy. At the end of the day, when you see someone take a sip of wine, or you see someone take a bite of a meal that you cooked, and they just smile, that's the greatest feeling in the world.
Yeah. And there's this refinement to it. That's the beauty of like the journey too. Like, you think about this, and this is something that I think people don't think about enough. Like, when I took a bite of that salsa, all of the components that had to come together, think about those mangoes, the farmers that farm those mangoes, the truck driver that drove those mangoes from the countryside into the city, the person who in the market sold those mangoes, and that's just one element, thinking about the onions and everything else. And like, whenever I think about wine and I think about my youth and growing up in wine country, I just sit there and I remember the days, where you see people out and they're just trimming back the vines in the wintertime. And then, the mustard season comes in and you still see people out there working the fields. And then the summer comes and all the tourists come. Hey, it's beautiful. You start to see things blooming. And it's such a beautiful time of year, but people don't realize that this whole process has not stopped. There have been people out there cultivating, people putting their sweat, their strength, their energy into this plant. And when my daughter was there with us one time, and we were there when there was a frost, and the big fans turned on, and we're like, "Whoa," and she was like, "What is that sound?" I said, "That's the people protecting the vines." And she's like, "Well, why would they need to protect the vines?" And I said, "Because it's a living thing. It is alive, and it has to be protected." And she was like, "Wow." And I mean, and people don't realize there's so many things that can affect these plants. And yet, when you get to that bottle and people sit there and drink it. And I mean, you go back to philosophers of old, and wine was something that they would talk about, this refining process, the process of building something beautiful. I had a guest on a podcast that I did a while back, and he was an acupuncturist, an herbalist, and we were going to talk about this topic, but then he was like, "Yeah, I've got this other hobby. I carve jade." I was like, "What? You carve jade? That's cool."
Left turn.
And we kind of, I was totally out of left field. I was like, "That's rad, man." But one of the things that he was talking about was this ability to see something in the future, like what he wanted to get to. And this idea of like, you have this rough thing, whether it be, a bunch of grapes or a piece of jade. And you're just sitting there going, all right, these grapes, I'm going to get to here. And people sit there and they come and see what you get to there, but they don't understand the journey. When you start that process of looking at the harvest that's come in and you're like, how am I going to get to the finished product? Where does your mind go? What's your creative process to start, creating something and getting those flavors in there?
It's a really, really good question. I think sparkling is a special thing to craft as well, and that's why I fell in love with sparkling, is because it is such a craft. I mean, it's funny that you use the analogy of jade carving, because I always say, if you wanted to be a stonemason, how would you start, right? And it's like, well, you'd find a stonemason you've done this for a long time, and you train under them, right? It's not, you don't go get a degree, you don't do this. It's there is art to it, there's science behind it, but it's really a craft, and you get better by doing it over and over and over again. But you get better by doing it with the same materials as well, right? It takes a long time to learn a vineyard, and it takes a long time to learn your craft. And when I sit down and I think about the harvest that's coming in, right, and there is a lot of preparation that goes into it that I think people kind of take for granted. They think that winemakers are some mythical creature that can just smell something and be like, oh, it's a this, and it's like, yeah, we do have a heightened sense of smell. We do have a heightened sense of taste, right? Like, my olfactory system is where I make my bread and butter. That's my money maker, right? And it's my craft, but it's also a muscle. So you have to train it. And that training comes from doing things that other people don't necessarily see. You're forgetting that, we're out there, like you said, in the winter, and we're pruning, and we're looking at how we're setting up the vine architecture. We're looking at the fruit set. We're tasting the fruit when it's green before it's gone through veraison. I'm looking at the canopy. I'm looking at everything. So I have kind of this background idea of what Mother Nature has given us as raw materials before we even get to pick. But then we're tasting so much as we lead up. And what I try and do is follow each individual block varietal grape, whatever we're working with. And really, at that point, you're done trying to control it, and you're more listening to what it wants to be. Right. And what I mean by that is where Pinot Noir really takes on, Pinot Noir is a a lot of winemakers' favorite grapes, because it is so delicate, it is so fickle, it is so expressive. It's very expressive of the vintage, it's very expressive of the site that it's grown, and it's very expressive of what's going on just kind of regionally. Think about Burgundy versus California versus Santa Barbara versus, South Africa, these things like that, where it is Pinot Noir, but it's so different. So you really have to kind of listen to what the grape wants to be. And then you have to kind of have this idea. I always say that you should make wine in your head before you make it in the cellar. You have to have an idea of where you want to go so that you know how to get there. And then once you have that base framework, then it's really about listening. And I think that's something that, over my career anyway, has really kind of developed. And that's what I think took me the longest time to learn, is that you're really not in control. And it's hard for young winemakers, because you want to come in and you have this idea, and you want to almost kind of strong arm this. I know what I want, and I want it to do this. Well, sometimes that's not what the wine wants to do, and I see it often. And it resonates with consumers. There are times that we chase trends. Oh, low alcohol. We make low alcohol wines, and it's like, but that site's not a low alcohol site. Let's celebrate that site for what it is. So when I think about the creative process, it's more about listening, and it's more about trying to figure out exactly what it wants to be, rather than trying to force it into something that it shouldn't be, right? And that's a tough thing, because it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of experience. And that's why I think I fell in love with winemaking, because there's a cathartic rhythm to it, and there's a cathartic rhythm to the creative process. And in every creative industry, whether it be art or music or cooking or winemaking or anything that has to do with creating something that is, a part of your thought process, you have to have downtime. Right? Because that's when your mind recharges and you look at things differently. And the wines need downtime as well, right? The wines need time to rest. So often, especially, it's fun because we'll do like some behind the scenes tours and we'll taste people through base wines, and it's like at such an awkward phase, and I'm like, oh, this wine is going to be this wine is going to be amazing down the road. And then it just takes time for it to come out. So there's a cathartic rhythm to the winemaking process. We're doing the same thing every single year, but we're doing it with different base materials. So you understand and you can kind of know what's going to happen. We prune every year, but every year pruning is different. We harvest every year, but every year harvest is different. We do the same things in the growing season, but every year it's just different enough that it kind of keeps your mind interested. But there's also that downtime in between each specific task where your brain gets to kind of recharge and do that. And I think that's extremely important in the creative process, to sit down and be able to listen to something, because that's when you kind of hear what the wine wants to be and where it wants to go, and just give it a chance to speak to you, and then guide it in the way that you want to guide it. I call it bowling with bumpers, right? You don't ever want to use the bumpers, but they're there if you need them.
When got a little Finding Nemo moment. I'm good at pulling random things into podcasts. I had
Ooh.
a podcast I was doing about health and wellness, and I had a Karate Kid reference. So I'm proud of that. But my daughter and I were in Maui, and I grew up in Southern California. My parents were in the Napa Valley. I moved down to Southern California for high school, and then I moved back up to the valley. But one of the things that was interesting was when I was in San Diego, I took up surfing. And when I was in Maui recently with my daughter, we were there and I was trying to teach her boogie boarding. And one of the things that we were working on was just watching the waves. And it was this powerful thing. And she's like, "Do I go for this one?" I said, "Not this one." "How do you know?" I said, you gotta get to know them. You gotta get to know the waves. You gotta watch them. You gotta pay attention to them. "How about this one?" "No, not this one." "How about this one?" And we did this like 5 minutes. And finally I was like, "Oh, you see that out there?" And she's like, "What? It looks like all the red others." And I said, "No, no, no, no. That one's different. That one's going to come and that one's going to take you all the way to shore." "Dad, are you sure?" "I'm certain. You just got to get ready." And we turned around and boom, it took her all the way to shore. And when she came back out and she's like, "Oh, are we getting it soon?" So she's like, "I know which one it is now. That one looked like that." And I said, "No, that one, it's going to be different next time." And one of the beautiful things is that I was teaching her the art of sitting, waiting, watching, and being aware of, as much as you want to control the ocean is the ocean. Nature is nature. And if you can learn to sit and trust the process, certainly you can go to better spots, you can try different things. But if you can learn to trust the process, you can get amazing results, and that's part of the beauty of it. That same day, we were sitting there, and finally, she's like, "Well, this is tough. It's tough to wait sometimes." And I said, "What nice things can happen with you wait?" And she's like, "What?" And exactly at that moment, a sea turtle swam up and around our legs, went a circle around our legs. And we had just watched Finding Nemo, and she's like, "It's Crush!" She was like freaking out. And she's like, "It's awesome. We're in the flow right now." And I said, "Yes, we are." But when you're describing what you're describing, and for a lot of my friends that have worked in ag and in farming and such, they've had a similar type of a story of like, certainly you can craft things, but there are so many things that are, out of our control. One of the best examples I remember is reading of like Stradivarius violins. Stradivarius violins were so special. And one of the things that they found that made them special was that there was actually like this mini ice age that caused the trees in the region to grow more dense. And the density of the wood was something that, at that time when the wood was harvested for those violins, gave these violins this resonant quality. Who would you can't even plan that. Certainly there is like something about what the master craftsman does, but at the same time, there's just this, for lack of a better word, magic that comes together in the process. This magic, there's an art, a science, but then there's the magic that happens when you finally get that violin, when you finally get the bottle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good analogy because it's really about just trying to kind of organize chaos, right? Let the chaos
I love
continue
that.
to happen, but do it in an organized manner. And but what I mean by that is you have to be prepared. And I think that's what you can really tell high quality wine from manufactured wine, right? Crafted wine from manufactured wine in the way that it presents itself to the senses, right? There's a lot more nuances, and it's just like you said when you were sitting on your surfboard or your boogie board. And, had you tried to force that, you would have missed kind of these beautiful moments. And that's, I think, the hardest thing to learn as a winemaker is patience, right? And it's really interesting because early on in my career, the patience was something that was, it was anticipation, but it was, almost palpable how you really wanted to finally get there. And then when you tried to force it there, you got there and you're like, that's not how I saw it in my head. And I think that's the hardest thing to do as a winemaker is sit down and sit back and say, nope, not yet. Just like you were with the waves. Nope, not that one. Right. And that's the hardest thing we do when we're making wine, especially sparkling wine. I mean, for instance, our vintage that we made in 2024 last year, all of the wines will not be fully released for another 10 years. So, right, it's kind of you're making these decisions, and that feedback loop is really hard because we're trained as humans, and especially in industry. You get feedback, you make a change, you do it again. You get feedback. Think about if you're a programmer, right, and you're coding something. You're doing this 50, 60, 70,000 times a day, and you're getting all of the synthesis input back to you so that you continue to refine it. Well, as winemakers, we do this once a year. And that feedback loop requires, even though we get to do it once a year, that feedback loop on a quick schedule requires a 3-year process. So your changes that you make are different. And it's very interesting that you use the word the journey, right? Because that's something that I really kind of built my winemaking philosophy around, was to enjoy the journey, because it's the process that you fall in love with rather than the end result. And the end result becomes something beautiful because you respected the process and because you perfected the process, right? And you're making changes not to the end product, but you're making changes to your processes, and you're making changes to the things that you do and how you actually work with the wines changes. And as I've gotten farther along in my career, it was very interesting because early on I was like, okay, what can I do to make this wine? And now I'm like, what can I not do to show the best expression of this vineyard? Can we do less? Can I use Coopers? And it's something that it goes all the way down. And this is the thing I think, a lot of people know the general process of making wine and then the general components that go into it, barrel, stainless steel. We talk about these things that are very, 10,000 foot level, but it gets very, very granular. And it's part of what I love about the community. When I'm selecting oak for our wines, I don't go to the Cooper and I say, I want this barrel. I say, here's the wine I'm trying to make. You know your forest better. You know your craft better than I do. I could not go in and cooper a barrel. That's not my forte. Here's the wine I want to make. What would you suggest we use? And it's through this sense of community, right? Through this sense of companionship. And it's very interesting because these coopers, I see them once a year when they come out for sales trips, but every year they love coming because it's a very different interaction, because I'm saying, hey, I don't really want to talk about sales, I want to talk about pricing, I don't like tariffs, all this stuff. I want to go taste the wine out of your barrel so that we can talk about what we're going to do this year, right? Here's what I saw. Here's the barrel that you got me. And that's what I really love about things like oak or different vessels is you can express things in a very, very different manner. And it's what I love about this industry, and also educating people. I took the same block of Chardonnay and I put it in stainless steel. I put it in a sandstone amphora, and I put it in oak. And then we tasted people through all these things, and they're like, these are three different wines. I was like, nope, they're the same wine, just in three different vessels. And I think that's what's really, really nice about being part of this community is you get such a chance to express it, but it's really just about guiding that chaos, right? And guiding the things to kind of where you want to find the balance. I think that's the biggest key, is finding balance between all of these seemingly things that don't make sense, that are kind of out. I think of it like a word cloud, right? And things are all over the place. Winemaking is really about just trying to drive that to a central point. You have the idea of what you want to convey, and then when you get those inputs that you can't control what Mother Nature does. Just like you said, you can't control the ocean, right? The ocean will always win. And I think the most humbling thing is when you do try to control it, you figure out who's in control very quickly.
Good luck.
Right?
Right.
You hit
I
that
gotta grab
bait.
something. You got me thinking on something, and so my brain goes a million miles a minute. So I love what you just said, and there was a couple things that you said there. I went to a musical show with my daughter tonight, and I brought this camera. This is I love making videos. I love making stuff. This is a Nikon FM2. It's an old film camera. It's really old. And one of the things that I took a photo, and my daughter leaned over, and she's 9. She's like, "Was it a good photo?" And I said, "I have no idea." And she's like, what do you, and I said, "Well, I know what I know. I know I framed it well. I know that I captured the light well. I know I set my lens right. But the rest of it, I'll find out later." When? Well, when I finish this roll. When will that be? Maybe in a month? Maybe in a week? I don't know. And then we get it developed. And well, how long does that take? Maybe it takes it 2 days. We live in a fast world, but some of the best things out there are slow, and take time. And I think that's one of the things with spirits, with wine, is so special, is that in a digital world, wine is analog. And we live in this digital fast world where you can order things, you can get everything, but the reality is some things take time. And I mean, as I get older, I always heard people say, "Oh, that person aged like a fine wine." And I never understood that. But you see it as, the beauty of gaining something with time. And I think it's such a valuable thing to look at too, that there is this slowness, and to respect that slowness and to respect the process. But let me ask you this. How has your approach to winemaking evolved over the years? Has it changed at all?
It's definitely evolved. The base premise is the same, right? It's trying to drive flavors that make people happy. That's it, right? That's what we do. It. I love seeing when somebody tastes this, and you can just see there's a moment of nostalgia. It hits a certain chord. And, I think in the industry, especially as we've gotten more intricate and we've gotten master somms have become these rock stars now, and everybody feels they have to know exact phrases and drink out of a certain glass and this and that. My favorite thing is still seeing just that primal moment of understanding. And I think in the industry, I think we do a poor job of giving consumers credit that they know what they're tasting and drinking. They might not use the same vocabulary that we do or talk about it the same way, but there's a recognition and they know what they like. And for me, the winemaking style has evolved to be more hands off, more expressive by guiding rather than controlling. Um, and it was something that my winemaking mentor really, really taught me. I was very fortunate. I came into this, and I was a young, passionate, driven, excited young man, and I had a gentleman by the name of John Kelly look at me, and every winemaker has those moments where I can tell you, you know exactly what wine was, what opened my brain to what wine is. And every winemaker's wine is different, but they all have one. And this wine for me was the 2003 Haynes Pinot Noir from John Kelly over at Westwood here in Sonoma. And it was one of those ones where it hit me in such a way I stopped. And that to me is really where my winemaking has changed. Is often when you're young, you're chasing these scores, you're chasing these accolades and things like that. And for me, it's about creating a wine that is generational. That's really what's changed. And what I mean by that is if you can have a bottle of wine that sits on a table and there's 5 different generations, right? Great great grandma all the way, hopefully you're fortunate all the way down to young kids that are tasting this wine, smelling this wine, and they all find something that they like in it, then you've done your job, right? And for me, it's really about teasing out what the wine wants to be. My approach has evolved from trying to tell the wine what to do to listening to what the wine wants to do and being just a vessel to create that, right? Because the wine will tell you what it wants to do if you listen. And that I think is the pivotal moment in a winemaker's career when they realize, again, just like in the ocean and you're learning to surf, or just like when you're riding a bike, you're not in control, right? And once you realize that you're not in control, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities. So it has gone from trying to control things to the manner that I want them to be, to being a vessel to showcase what Mother Nature gave us. And that is, I think, a really hard transition to make because it's slow, right? And you said in a world where we're 140 characters or less and we rely on instant feedback and 20-second video clips and that's it, we're creating something that is, a War and Peace novel. But when you get to the end, there was a sense of accomplishment, right? You've read that book and you've done this thing. And again, it's not about getting to the end of the book. It's about opening your mind as you're reading through that whole book. And that's what I really think about a bottle of wine as well. I want you to sit down and think about things differently by the time you finish that bottle of wine than when you started. And that's hard to do, right? It's hard to create wines that are that expressive. And not every wine is. And sometimes that's exactly what the wine wants to be. Sometimes that wine is, it is, I like to call them a pool pounder, right? You sit down, you drink a whole bottle in the pool. It's great. And then there's some wines that you want to sit down with by the fire and a great book, and you want to just sit there for hours and hours and hours. But it's about listening to what those wines want to do and creating things that are true to that wine, and just not trying to overshadow it with your own heavy hand. It's really about how you work in harmony with what Mother Nature gave you, as well as, what the grape wants to be.
I love that. As a we have a similarity. I actually worked as an educator for a long time. It was my side hustle while I was doing media and this and
Yes.
that. And in graduate school, I taught kids. And it was interesting. One of the things that you see is that there's an inherent quality in each child and in each person. And with my own daughter, I just said, hey, you know what? I think this is something good. Had these little musical things that she did when she was young, and I was like, there's got to be some potential there. So I put her in piano lessons, and not gonna lie, it was painful. It's like 2 years of Twinkle Twinkle, 2 years of this, of just like, and I was just like, I sat there and I looked and I was like, maybe I did the wrong thing. Maybe she's not musical. Maybe she takes after that one auntie that just has no musical ability whatsoever. And and then one day my wife came down, and my wife is actually a famous singer here in Vietnam. She was the first winner of Vietnam Idol, and her family is extremely musical. And she came down and she's like, I want you to listen to this. And she put on this song. And it was the intro to Ave Maria by Bach. And she showed my daughter a little bit about how to play it. My wife could do it a little bit. And the craziest thing happened that my daughter was like, I love that. And she's like, I am going to ask my piano teacher to help me with that. And we're like, okay, Twinkle Twinkle. That's a great idea. Oh, a week later, she was playing Bach. And it was just like, hold on. Like, whoa, where did that come from? But like, this thing was inside. And it's simply, whether that was the piece of marble, that needed to have the David released from it, whether that was whatever. I was trying to sit there and think of different like famous sculptures, and I literally could not think of any right now. I was like, David, okay, that's not what I can remember right now. But whatever it was, that was needing to be released from that thing. It's in that inherent nature is there. And the beauty of it is to be able to have the eye to see it, and then I love what you were saying, that you used to have more control, but now you let it, let it emerge. Which leads to my next question. Like, how do you stay creative and inspired in a field that blends tradition and innovation? How do you keep your creativity there? Because I mean, even with things you love, there can be a monotony that comes to it when you do it all the time. How do you find that creative inspiration to keep things fresh?
That's a really good question, Sean, and I think it just comes from the fact that you have to continue to look at things through a different lens. And for me, it just comes inherently. There's no real process that I can say, I do this and that's what makes me creative. It's just every time I sit down, I have such a respect for this substance that I sit down and I look at it, and everything is always something new. And I've kind of gone through a series of questions in my head that revolve around um, the why, not the what. And when you start to focus on the why instead of what does this wine want to be, what is the market looking for right now? That's how we kind of approach creativity, right? We try and find a hole, and we find a creative way to fill that hole. For me, it's not really about that. It's about looking at, maybe it is something that I haven't even thought of, right? And I always come at this from, a point of almost like Steve Jobs, right? He gave you an iPhone when nobody knew that you needed an iPhone. And he didn't give you an iPhone to give you a
Right.
phone, right? He gave you an iPhone so that he could get iTunes into your pocket. That's a very different level of creativity. So when you start thinking about the why, right? I always ask, here's how I stay creative. Why would someone want to drink this wine? And when you ask yourself why, you start looking at things differently. It's not what, it's not the flavor, it's not the barrel, it's not the alcohol content, it's not the feel, it's the why, right? Does this wine speak to me and tell me why it wants to be drunk? Or does it tell me what it is and drink it, right? And you can always create the why by coming at this in a different way. You can look at things in terms of, and that's why I love sparkling wine, because very rarely, and I can count and been making sparkling wine for over half my career now, and I can count on one hand and less than three fingers sparkling wines that I've created that have been a complete wine on their own. It is very rare because you're working with a style of wine that is inherently unbalanced. We're picking very early. We are picking at very low pHs, very high acidities, very low alcohols, because we're going to re-ferment this in the bottle again. But it's inherent that there's going to be some sort of a hole in that wine. And the beauty comes from putting together two things that on their own would be kind of disjointed and not feel good, and put them together and create something magical, right? It's like a symphony. And when you start asking yourself, why would someone want to drink this wine? You start looking at things in a way that is always able, because the why is endless. The what you can answer. And once you answer the what, you're done, right? And that stops your creative process. If you answer the why, once you answer the why, there's a whole nother door that opens, and there's 50 doors behind that of, okay, well, if we go, and it gives you options. So asking why people would want to partake in this, and why people specifically would want to partake in what you are doing, I think gives you a different lens to look through, that captures something special. It captures something that is endless, because there is no, it's a loop, right? The feedback loop is endless. Once you answer why, it goes right back to why, why not, right? And rather than what. Once you answer the what, that's very easy. That's that's the technical side, right? That has an end, that has a process, that is what it has to be. The why is infinite, and I think that always keeps you thinking about things in a different way.
Why could be uh, celebrating a new wedding. It could be a reunion between long lost friends. It could be that's where the why becomes something more esoteric. It becomes something more um, just magical in a way, you know. And so I think that that's the beauty of like you again are creating something that has this essence of joy, of happiness, of love, of that 5 generations sitting together and each one finding something magical, you know, whether that be the scent, the aroma, watching the bubbles, you know, all of those things could be something. Let me ask you this. What are some of the biggest challenges facing winemakers today?
The biggest challenge facing us right now, I would definitely say, is remaining relevant to younger consumers, and because it, I grew up in a generation that you use the analogy earlier, the analog and digital, right? And my generation is very interesting because we were at the change from analog to digital, so we remember we remember a time when you didn't have a cell phone in your pocket, right? And it's very funny because I have more memories from the time that I've had a cell phone in my pocket. However, they're much less formulative for me, right? They're much less easy to remember because I'm so reliant on, oh, where was that picture? What was this? However, the time before, when it was just me and my friends and our bike, I can tell you exact streets and names and things and this and that and exactly what we did because it hit my memory in a different way. And the challenge for winemakers now is, how do you remain relevant in make something exciting that is so slow, that is not an RTD, instant feedback, this, that. And I think that is something that is, just as anything else, going to take time. And it's going to take people that are telling authentic stories. And it's going to take people that are doing things in an authentic manner. Hey, I am trying to create a wine that I think you're going to like. And that's it. That's also why I asked the why question, because the why is personal. And I think the biggest challenge that we face in the wine industry is coming at things from a personal level that is truly personal, right? And that's what I try and do with the wines that we make here, is just give you uh, a sense of what we do. Because it is about the people. You talked about it earlier. There's very few people that think about how many hands have touched this product by the time it gets to you. Um, and that's something that I think will resonate with people once we can start getting that story formulated in the right manner, because that's what's going to draw those younger consumers in my opinion, is, telling a story that is, and that's why I fell in love with wine. I'm a history major by trade, and I fell in love with history because of stories, right? And I fell in love with the aspect of telling the story, not getting to the end of the story. And that, coupled with the fact that this feedback loop is so slow, that you have to really get back to trusting your gut. I think winemakers really have started to rely a lot on, um, well, we have all these technologies and these services and this and that. And that's perfect. I do pay attention to chemistry. I do pay attention to what we're doing on a scientific level, but there is still something so intangible about this substance. And that really resonated with me because when I was working in a previous job of mine, I got to taste, I was doing research and I got to taste every year the wines that we made. There was a Cabernet house and we got to taste all the wines that we made, versus first growth Bordeaux versus Chateau Petrus. And part of what that I had to do was put together all the chemistry panels, full panels, and everything you could possibly think of, and look at things on a chemical level so that we could try, and what they were trying to do is say, okay, this is what we aspire to be. How do we get there? And for me, it was just such a backwards way. And I was like, you do the chemistry on Chateau Petrus, which is widely regarded as one of the best wines in the entire world, right? Ages forever. It's garners a very high price every single year. It's got something magical when you taste it. You look at the chemistry, and by the chemistry, they should not have put this wine in the bottle, right? You're like, that makes no, and it was just kind of, my mind just melted. And I'm like, you taste it and you go back and you're like, okay, I got to do that chemistry again. I messed something up, and nope, it came out the same way. And you're like, what in the world, right? And I think that's something that we've kind of lost in the rise of technology, is we've lost the sense to trust our gut. And that was what I have two winemaking mentors, and the first one laid the groundwork, and the second one pushed me to be that creative person. And when you were talking about answering, I told you the why, but the other thing is you have to trust your gut, because there's sometimes where you look at things and they make no sense. You cannot make 2 + 2 does not equal 4 in the equation, but you just have to know it's going to work. And I think that's what we've lost as winemakers, that we need to get back to, because we've been chasing the trends and we've been so worried about the consumers. If you do things that make people happy and you do things in an authentic manner, people will come. They will. They want to. So trusting your gut and just telling an authentic story, I think, is ways that we can really get out of the way that the challenges that face us coming up as winemakers and as wine growers.
I love that. Yeah, I think that there's so many cool things that you touched on there. But one of the things too, that when you were talking about the work and like the current thing is like with short form video and all this stuff, you think about like what you can show. I was doing a video for my wife. We made this one video, and all of these celebrities, and I'm not hating on anyone, but they were flexing. My husband bought me 2 Birkin bags. And my wife looked at me. She's like, "What do you buy me?" And I was like, "Well, not that." I was like, "Love you, but yeah, man, I'm not spending 50 grand on a bag. No offense." But I was like, one day I was like, "But I do want to do something interesting." So I found a really, really good leather maker, and I said, "Can you help me make like a Hermes style bag?" And so I sat down and we started, and he's like, "Yeah, I will." And he's like, "But one of the things I have to tell you is that it's not fast." And I'm like, "Well, I want to make a video of it." He's like, "It's not fast." And, it was 30 days, 4 hours a day, where I was sitting there cutting little pieces of wood. But at the end of it, I made this beautiful Kelly bag. Looked like, he studied with the Hermes, like, master craftsman in France, and he came back and started making his own stuff in the same styles. And it had this soul to it that, when my wife went online and it was like flexing a little bit, you might have had those, but my husband made this. Like his life force is in this, his soul's in this, And I think that's what we need to get back to, because even with like, I work with a lot of like big, I have a lot of big YouTubers that I work with, and I talk to these guys all the time, and they said there's this one the big trend that they're seeing is that people are really coming back to authentic content. They want to see true stories. They want to hear, for me, I'm also a history major. So like, I love diving into stories. I love hearing the why and the how and all of those good things. And for me, my dream would be like develop out this and other podcasts. Dude, I'd love to do a dirty jobs type thing, but just showing not dirty jobs, but like cool jobs, and like go out and being like, let's see what it takes to make a horse saddle. Like, dude, can you imagine like how wild that is? I've seen videos online, and it's just this other thing. And for me, like, it's off topic a little bit, but like I saw this one guy cleaning the pipes near my house, and I was fascinated by it because it's just so different than what you would think, But the beauty is in the, I think, telling the stories and showing people like my daughter that there is value in taking pictures. So I gave her own camera, and I said, we're going to go through a month and take pictures. And then when she took the pictures and we got them developed, and she was like, I took that a month ago. Wow. That really aged. I remember that moment. I was there, and it's and it was that thing that you were talking about, that tactile thing. And I think some of my best moments with friends, I sit back. I remember I was working at Meadowood. I was just 21, and I was working at the Pool Terrace Cafe at Meadowood in St. Helena. And one of the guests had ordered what was it? I think it was a bottle of Contessa. And as a college student, I couldn't afford a bottle of Contessa. And he had a glass out of it. And then he said, you know what? I'm done with this. You guys take the rest. And me and my buddies went out, and we went out by Lake Hennessy. out, and we just all each had a glass, and we just sat out there under the trees, watched the sunset. I remember that bottle. I remember the flavor. I remember the taste. I remember the quality. I remember the color. I remember the scent. I remember everything because it was one of those moments, like those perfect moments in time. A bunch of friends in the middle of the summer after a long day work, sitting out and just enjoying a glass of wine together. And that type of magic, I think, is what people want and what we can get back to, you know?
Yeah, and I have a special phrase for that, Sean. I call it PYPD. Put your phone down. Right? PYPD, put your phone down. And it's something that, I really started once we had kids. And I realized, and people ask me all the time, why are you not on social media? I can't send you things on Instagram. I can't find you on Facebook. Yeah, because you have my number. You can reach out. I'm still the guy that's like, hey, call me. People are like, I don't want to call you. Right. But it really resonated with me once we had kids because I was sitting there and I used to do social media and used to do all this stuff. And I was scrolling. And in front of me,
Constant.
my kid is down there playing with blocks and trying to figure things out. And I just decided in the moment, we're done. I don't need to be here. I don't need to live digitally. I can live analog and I can live with my kids. Right. And I never wanted my kids to feel like they were competing for time with my phone. And I still have things to do. I still get sucked in from time to time. Emails go off, and it's still hard for me for sure. It's still something I'm working on from day to day. But those memories that you just described, right? Did you have a phone in your pocket?
Oh, yeah. No,
No.
definitely not.
No, right? But you were present, right? And by PYPD, if you put your phone down, you live in the present. And we forget that time is really our most important resource and our most important asset is time. And when you take time for granted, it seems to go very, very quickly. However, those summer days, right? I bet you that moment in your mind feels much longer than it actually was, right? And that's the beautiful thing about being analog, being here, being present. And that's what I think, the wine industry the wine industry has survived for so long because of things like that, because of the memories that we create. And it's going to continue to survive. It's going to continue to thrive. We will have these ebbs and flows like we've seen, and we will have the challenges like we face. But, it's these moments that you just described with your friends that, we're trying to convey. I'm trying to convey that in every single wine that I make. And maybe it's not the exact same thing. Maybe it's something different, but I want to try and convey that in every single wine that we make so that people can continue to have experiences like that, experiences that make you put your phone down, experiences that make you connect on a different level, right? And have different conversations and different talking pieces. And it's something that I think is true only to wine, right? It is very different than any other substance out there. And it's what I absolutely love about it. And it's what I think will continue to carry winemakers for generations to come, right? And it's also a humbling thing, right? That's the beauty of it. If you do this for a long, long time, you're still only a blip in the history of wine. But it's about leaving it in a better spot than you found it and giving people things that they can hang on to that are those stories, that are the celebrations, that are the connections that are different than other things.
I love that. Well, let me ask you one last question before we go. If you could go back in time and give advice, winemaking advice to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Slow down. Slow down. Because I think early on in any winemaker's career, they're so excited about creating something and they're so excited to get to the end of that first process that they go through. That oftentimes it takes so long to learn your craft because you're not paying attention to the things that you need to. And that's because you're moving at a million miles a minute because you don't have the experience. I would go back and say, it's okay to make some of these mistakes that you were so scared to make. Because honestly, that's what I've learned the most from is when you make a mistake and you go, huh, how do I not do that again? But it's the process. It's the process of learning how to get yourself out of it. So the number one advice I could give to my younger winemaking self is slow down and enjoy those first couple vintages. Right. And it's, because those are vintages I look back upon very fondly. And I look at back and I'm like, if I could go back and do those ones again, I absolutely would. You're in a different space in your life. You're in a different space in everything. Not that the vintages that I have now are not great. Not that the vintages that aren't to come are great, but there is a different feel and a different sense of discovery that I think comes from slowing down and paying attention to, and that's just, I would give myself that advice just in life, not just in winemaking, but just in life, is learning. And I think that's the coming of age type thing, is learning to slow down and learning to enjoy just where you're at. Just be okay with where you're at. It's going to work out. And that's something that I truly love about wine, is it now has taught me that the process is the enjoyment of it, not the end project.